What I wanted, my goal when I'm doing my tours is to make sure you understand how the time that Harriet spent in Cincinnati enabled her to write the book that changed the world. Okay? Harriet was never a resident of this house. She lived a couple blocks down once she got married. Before that, she lived in downtown where she and her sister had started the first school for girls west of the Appalachian Mountains. But a couple very important things did happen in her life. Harriet was born in 1811 in Connecticut. There's a couple seats down. She studied under her sister in the first school for girls in New England until she was 16, and then for 5 years she became an assistant teacher. Then in 1832, their father, Dr. Harriet Beecher, one of the most prominent ministers of that age, was hired to come to Cincinnati to recruit students to study at a school called London Seminary. I do believe you did not come up this road. You go down 2 blocks. There's a Cadillac dealership, and that was where the main school buildings and the dorms and all that stuff were in the school was built. So Harriet was 20 years old when she came here, 2021. And she and her sister opened the first school for girls west of the Appalachian Mountains, the first school downtown. And a guy named Calvin Stowe was called in to be the number 2 person at the college. He was one of the most respected Bible scholars. He wrote a lot of the tracts about how do you study the different books of the Bible. Very famous for that, and a great teacher. He was married. How many of you have read Uncle Tom's Cabin? Okay, if I tell you he was married to Eliza, does that name ring a bell from the story? Okay. But this is the Beecher Stowe house. If he's married, how do you think that happened? Everybody got a guess? In 1833, the first of several cholera epidemics came through Cincinnati, and Eliza died. So, and Eliza and Harriet had become good friends. After about an 18-month mourning period, Harriet did not start writing until she came to Cincinnati. I hope none of you think that Harriet only wrote one book. Okay, I have found, I believe it's 38 different books that Harriet is listed as either author or co-author of, along with raising 7 kids and doing homeschool. So she was a pretty busy lady. Okay? Her very first small book, they couldn't find a good enough geography book of this area when they opened their school, so in 1833, Harriet had her first book published. It was a geography book of Southwest Ohio, the Northwest Territory. But they both became members of a writers club called the Semicolon Club. And if you are interested in that, we keep that alive. Once a month we do a book club, which is called the Semicolon Club around the area that they had the writers. At that time, you go online to the website here, and you can participate from wherever you are in the world. It's really kind of neat thing. But it was also a social club. So several of the guys invited Harriet to an outing, and several of them invited Calvin to an outing. And in January of 1836, they got married in the front room here, the parlor, which you'll get to see in a little bit. So a couple of important things did happen to Harriet in the house. The other thing was, ask questions about this when you get over into the study. Okay, because I don't have time. I usually get bogged down on this because it's about teaching, and that's important. The seminary, within 2 years, Lyman Beecher recruited 100 students to be here. This was the Wild West. We're in the 6th largest city in the country. Only Boston, Brooklyn, New York, Philadelphia, and New Orleans were there. There wasn't a whole lot else around here. So how am I going to get you to come and study? Come all the way to Cincinnati if you're in Philadelphia or down in the Deep South or something. That's what Lyman Beecher was recruited for, was to students here. 40 of them were seminarians. At the time, that was the largest seminary class in the Western Hemisphere that ever been assembled. And in late January, early February of 1834, there was a student named Theodore Well who brought a couple of his other students with him and told Dr. Beecher that we need to espouse immediate emancipation, the colonization is never going to work. And that, the debate then, we've ever heard of the lame debates, but the debates were not about should slavery exist or not, it was how to end it. Okay? We're not familiar with colonization, that was where, because the Constitution said slavery was legal, they were trying not to destroy the Constitution while ending slavery by purchasing the enslaved people and sending them to some place where they would have been a lot better. Africa, the Caribbean, something like that. Okay? And again, I got a whole lot more to do about that. So, the debates happened, and after they were over, there were all but 8 students left because the people who ran the school said, you can't have, this was the first public debate on the slavery issue in the United States. But a lot of the students were recruited to go to a brand new school where that school provided the first bachelor degrees to either a woman or an African American in the United States. Does anybody have an idea what that school is? Okay, it's up by Cleveland, up in the northern part of the state. So, the reason that's so important is by 1836, Dr. Beecher's back up to 75 students. Now he wants to, history we built the library, they had to sell books and everything to keep the school open. So he sends his number 2 guy, Calvin, to Europe to buy books. Well, he's also now the son-in-law. He leaves the end of March, gets to Europe, and in May they find out that Harriet is the child. They married 5 months, got right for a newlywed, and that kind of thing. Calvin does not make it back with the communication and transportation of the age. Harriet not only was pregnant, she had twins. Then the third grew back here on this side of the house. She came up to be with family because at that time you didn't go to a hospital to have a child. So those are 2 pretty important things that happened in the house. Harriet, though, had grown up in Litchfield, Connecticut. That's up right around where Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York are. Just picture on a map where that is. And if she had been up there, it's all likely that she would never have seen an enslaved person. Because you just didn't travel. Okay? Cincinnati is the only large city on the north side of the Mason-Dixon line. So this was the front line of the abolitionist movement. It was one of the absolute centers of the Underground Railroad. But Harriet goes down to the Maysville, Kentucky area to visit the family of one of her students. And while there, in a little township place right by there, she witnesses a slave auction. Would never have seen that if she had stayed in Connecticut. At that auction, Harriet kept a journal almost every day of her life. And I've got school groups here, 4th grade is Ohio history year. We get a lot of schools coming through. I always encourage the kids to start doing that if they're not doing it now. Harriet writes in her journal, I was there another 48 hours, and the mother never stopped crying. I never knew anything like this could happen. I know it was horrible, so then I'm going to fast forward. Harriet has 6 children while she's living in Cincinnati. The last one is born in 1848. Named Samuel Charles. They call him Baby Charlie. You'll see a panel in one of the rooms upstairs about that. In 1849, the worst cholera epidemic that came through this part of Ohio happened, and Baby Charlie died of cholera. And Harriet's journal, she wrote, "For the first time I understand the mother down in Maysville 15 years ago because she lost her little boy, I lost my little boy for the first time. I can fully understand. And that became one of the themes of the book, is how horrible the institution of slavery was to those who were enslaved, and how there was no regard for family or anything. And that was one of Harriet's crusades and what she did. She wanted to make sure that was going to be taken care of. All right? So, okay. In 1834, there was a formerly enslaved man who opened a furniture store down on 4th Street in downtown. And the cholera had just come through for that first time. And he sends a message up to one of the abolitionist newspapers and says, we don't know why, because they had a microscope, but they had no idea what germs and bacteria and things like that were. If you were sick, you either had bad air or bad blood. Okay? He said, I don't understand why, but if we boil our water, not even our animals are getting sick. Everybody's real happy to hear that, right? The powers that be said he used to be a slave. We can't know anything. We shouldn't listen to him. The truth, being prejudiced can kill you. Okay? So that's an experience that she had here. Other things in the family, she had, Harriet was a tiny little woman, 5 foot tall, probably the smartest person in any room she ever walked into, but she didn't like being the center of attention. And my sister was 4 foot 11, and she was at the opposite. She was going to make sure you knew she was there. Okay, so, but during the debates, she used to kind of sneak into the front room and perform all these guys were in there. I didn't even notice her. She became the very first pure abolitionist who wanted immediate emancipation in the Beecher family. Eventually, all but one did. That was the oldest sister. She wanted the colonization. The 2 youngest children who were living here in the house with Lyman Beecher and his wife, when you see the steps and where that office is, they sat on the steps right outside the room, and they became the second and third pure abolitionists in the family. So things that happened. But then, one day when you see the room, you'll get why it's important. 70 of the 100 students tried to get into the room that is the office to have this debate. It's smaller than the area we're sitting in. 70 people. Okay? Didn't fit. Used to be a Second Presbyterian church on the other side of this road. If you go towards downtown from here, I don't know how you're going. There's a stone bell tower that's still left, but in my lifetime I saw them tear that church down. They moved down there. He was the chaplain of the college, so it made sense. But then the public got to get in and hear the debate. Okay? Theodore Weld organized this thing. It lasted for 18 days. Actually 18 evenings. Okay? But 9 of the days were given to the colonizationists to give their presentation, and the other 9 were to the immediate emancipation side. Theodore Weld was one of the most widely published abolitionists of the time. He was recruited here actually to be a teacher. Because of that, he had already been through a seminary that was the same as this one up in New York, and they really wanted him to be an instructor. But he said, this is probably the only chance I'll ever get to study under somebody like Lyman Beecher. I want to be a student of this instructor. And this figure should get back on that. Because the last 2 speakers on the last day were Weld and a man named James Bradley, who at that time was the only African American who had ever been accepted into a college in the United States. So that's the first one happened because of the one that lived in this house long ago. And he's the last speaker. And after they've heard all this stuff, and what Weld's main thing was how horrible it was they were treating people and going to chase the freedom seekers, and they had the ads of how they described them and what they're allowed to do to them in the economy. You never have seen that in Cincinnati being a free state. They would not have published that in the newspapers here. So people are shocked. Some of the people who were on the board of the college owned meat packing plants. Cincinnati's nickname was Porkopolis. So we packed a third of the meat products that were done in the United States were done here in Hamilton County. Well, the guy, when I used to be at the museum center, I don't know if you saw that, it looks like it's all train station. It looks like a 1930s radio on the 75. I used to do a program on the meatpacking industry. We said that they sold everything but the squeal. They said pieces of meat went to the glacier homes, the hotels, whatever. The skin, the bones, the hair went to people like Procter & Gamble to make soap and candles and those kind of things. The rest of the pig was shipped to the deep south to feed the slaves on the coffee plantations. So if I own a meatpacking plant and almost half of my money is coming from sales to there, as much as I think that slavery is a horrible, horrible institution, do we still vote with our wallets? Mm-hmm. Okay. It's a tough decision. Do I want to see it end and it's going to hurt my family? Or, okay. So they told them they had to stop the thing or you're kicked out of school. They figured nobody will stay here. They'll do that because where else are they going to go? They're already in the middle of nowhere. The other two guys from like Cleveland were trying to start that new school called Oberlin. Recruited 70 of the guys to go up there. They were down to 8 students. 2 seminarians and 6 of the other students. Everybody else left. So, that's, I kind of jumped back a little bit. But, so there's about 2 or 3 minutes left. Anybody have questions? I know I jumped around and I'm just trying to get as many things. Yes, sir.
Why wouldn't